I have the privilege in my day job and my ACI job to travel around the world and see some really amazing projects, which I'd like to share with you today, just a couple of them. I could probably enthuse about these projects for days and days, but I won't do that to you. There is probably nothing more exciting and inspiring than tall buildings. And I'd like to spend some time this morning giving you an overview, first of all, defining tall buildings, sharing some facts and trends about tall buildings, a couple of case studies, identifying the technical resources that are available to ACI members, as well as the engineering and construction community that support your efforts in designing and building tall buildings, and then just talk a minute or two about the future. Tall buildings are defined as any building over 200 meters tall. In this decade, we added a second classification for super tall buildings, and those were buildings over 300 meters tall. And then about 2 years ago, it became necessary to add a third classification of tall buildings with the completion of the Burj Khalifa, and they sanctioned mega tall buildings, those buildings over 600 meters tall. Early in my career, I had the privilege of working on many tall buildings, and I can tell you, in our wildest dreams, I never thought in my lifetime we would see mega tall buildings. But we've achieved them, and we're continuing to break new barriers. Now, the interesting thing about tall buildings is that 2/3 of the world's tall buildings were completed since 2000. So that means in the previous 12 years, we've completed the construction, and we are now occupying 2/3 of the world's tall buildings. And you can see this is the escalation of number of tall buildings over time since we've been tracking them in 1920. Another fact about tall buildings, those buildings over 200 meters, is that as of the end of 2012, there were 756 buildings globally that were deemed tall. In 2012 alone, we completed 66 buildings globally. The number one market, no surprise, was China. But what you might find particularly surprising was the number two market, and this is for completions. It was Saudi Arabia, with 5 of them in Mecca. Dubai, the market is coming back, and we completed 3 there. Canada and Panama have been the strong markets in North America. Canada completing 4, and Panama making the top list for the 4th year in a row with 3 completed, compared to the fully urbanized United States that only completed 2. Within the 756 buildings globally, in 2012, in super tall buildings, we completed 66, and I'm not sure that's correct. But the record for 2013, by the end of July, we had already hit 73 buildings globally. So we're on pace to break records this year. But the interesting thing was in 2012, we doubled the number of megatall buildings around the world. We completed a second one. And does anybody know where that one is? Any guesses? Do I need to say good morning? Actually, it was in Mecca. So we're all familiar with the Burj Khalifa, and I know there's some wonderful presentations scheduled here. I'm not going to take time to highlight Burj Khalifa because there are much better informed people to talk about that. But what a lot of people don't realize is in 2012, the Mecca Royal Clock Tower Hotel was completed and reaching 601 meters. That's 1 meter above what was necessary to be classified as mega tall. That classification is 600 meters. It stands 1972 feet tall. Unfortunately, there's not much published on this, and most people around the globe will never have the opportunity to visit it because it is in sacred Mecca. So what are the trends that we're seeing in tall buildings in the past 10 years and also looking forward? Well, needless to say, the production of tall buildings are developing at an incredible pace. Another thing that we're seeing is the trends have moved from office buildings to mixed-use buildings. Almost all of these buildings that have been added to the global database support office, residential, and in many cases retail as well. The other thing is undeniable. The emerging markets are playing an increasing role. That is where the activity is. The Middle East, Asia, and Southeast Asia. But the other wonderful thing is the diversification of the structural materials. Let me elaborate. First, on the functions of tall buildings. As I noted early on in the emergence of tall buildings, let's see if I can find the pointer here. Yeah. Early on in the 1930s, most of the tall building stock in the world were office buildings. But compare that to what we had at the end of 2012. You can see that of the tallest 100 buildings in our global building stock, only 41 of them were pure office buildings. Most of the new building stock is either mixed use or powering into the marketplace now is residential. As I mentioned, the emerging markets are playing an increasingly important role in tall buildings. Back in 1930, 99 out of 100 of the tallest buildings in the world were located, no surprise, North America. This was the beginning of our rapid urbanization, which most people would say is completed today. Compared to 2012, it should be no surprise that of the 100 tallest buildings in the world, most of them are either in Asia or the Middle East, areas that, like India, are rapidly urbanizing. What's driving this? What is driving the advancement of tall buildings in emerging markets? Well, number one is their urbanization. They're going through in the 21st century what Europe and the United States and Canada did in the 20th century. And in doing so, the cost of land, once it becomes valued, begins to escalate. And then, as you urbanize, you need to realize cost efficiencies. And then, as the standards of living improve, there become demands for luxury living. That seems to go hand in hand as we saw the increase in the residential market in tall buildings. We're also seeing that the people who are moving into those tall buildings have very high expectations of their living space. What's most interesting is the estimate of where the top 20 tallest buildings will be in 2020. Almost all of them are either in China, which is the blue, the Middle East, or other places in Southeast Asia. Of note, there will only be one in the United States, the infamous One World Trade. One World Trade, which I will elaborate on a little bit more, as of today is expected to be the only building, not only in the United States, and not only in the North America, but in the entire Western Hemisphere on this list. The other projects, this is Kingdom Tower, which is under construction in Saudi Arabia. This is the Burj Khalifa, and this is the Shanghai Tower, which should finish up sometime next year or the following year. The Mecca Clock Tower is the wide building right here. I mentioned diversification of materials. If you're building tall buildings in the emerging markets, what better material is there to build with than concrete? All your materials are local. So it should be no surprise that we have seen a big shift away from structural steel used in the design and construction of tall buildings, to greater use of concrete, either entirely concrete frame buildings or a combination of concrete and steel buildings used compositely, or in some cases what we call mixed. You may have a steel podium frame and a concrete tower on top, or you might have a concrete podium frame with a steel frame on top. But certainly concrete is playing an increasingly important role in tall buildings. What does this mean to the concrete community? It pushes us to new heights. It pushes us in how we analyze. It pushes us in how we design. And it certainly pushes us in how we build. The construction technologies that have come out of tall buildings in the past 10 years is extraordinary. And if you're a tall building junkie like I am, and you monitor the awards every year that are given out for technology used in tall buildings, it should be no surprise after looking at these statistics that this technology is coming out of the emerging markets. This underscores the importance of globalism. It underscores the importance for knocking down the geographic barriers between countries so that we can exchange technological, not only know-how, but advancements around the world. That is the mission of ACI. The other thing that we see very important in tall buildings is the use of performance-based designs, not only on the structural side, but especially in the concrete material side. When you're designing low-rise and mid-rise buildings, the performance objectives that are often requested are the minimum of life safety, serviceability, and durability. But when you're involved with tall buildings, the expectations could be so much more vast, and they vary project to project. They might be survivability, like in the case of One World Trade. It could be versatility because of the mixed-use components of the buildings. It could be sustainability, a very important priority to many builders today. And it could simply be livability. Certainly important when you think about the movements of tall buildings. But the performance objectives with these buildings have to be defined early on because they dictate the design criteria and the construction criteria. So I'd like to share quite quickly with you a couple of case studies of projects that my company has been involved with. And the first one is that one tall building that will be on the top 20 list in 2020 in North America, and that is what is known today as One World Trade. This is the tall building replacing the former World Trade Center, which was taken down, unfortunately, on 9/11 in 2001. Today, we've topped out on the World Trade Center. This shows them erecting the pinnacle on the top of the building, which happened this past spring. The World Trade Center stands as a symbol of liberty, of opportunity, of economic prosperity, what the world recognizes the United States for. Let's see if this will work. Pardon me. We need an updated video to show the addition of the pinnacle. But what a pleasure to be involved with this project, AECOM, through our associate Tishman Construction in New York City as the construction manager on this project. And when the New Jersey Port Authority, the owners of this project, decided to rebuild, they made a commitment that they wanted this structure to be the strongest and safest building in the world. The design reflects the security sensitivity of the structure. Now, this is an example of composite construction. The vertical loads are handled by a structural steel frame. The vertical core is enveloped by 2 feet of solid concrete and provides a critical part of the lateral load system. That vertical core at street level and up to the first 70 feet or 15 meters forms a 200-foot by 200-foot square of concrete that is 6 feet thick. This is for security reasons. It is utilized, obviously, as well in the structural lateral load system, but it is designed primarily for blast protection. An unfortunate requirement, but one that has been anticipated. The project also demonstrates the highest use, or the use of highest strength concrete in New York City of 14,000 psi or 96 megapascal. That might not seem too high compared to some of the strengths we're seeing achieved in the Middle East and in China and Southeast Asia. But in New York City, 14,000 is the highest commercially used. Most of the concrete, however, in this project is 12,000 psi or below. They also decided this would be a symbolism of environmental sustainability. And as you can see here, they had very ambitious energy performance goals, very ambitious water reclamation goals. And much of New York City is heated with waste steam, and they leverage that to help generate electricity. But one of the other requirements for this building was that the concrete be more economical and greener. This is not an easy thing to accomplish because the New York-New Jersey Port Authority also has a requirement that they do not allow any more than 400 pounds per cubic yard of Portland cement in the concrete that they purchase for any project. So think about that, 14,000 psi, and you have a limit on your Portland cement. Then the engineering requirements. They had 12,000 psi typically, an over-design for safety, high modulus of elasticity, and of course with those 6-foot thick walls, a heat of hydration restriction not to exceed 160, and a requirement for non-air entrained concrete. Then layer on top of that the construction requirements, and the most important one being the slump flow for the pumping of the concrete, because they wanted the ability to pump at least 40 stories at a time. Now this will pale in comparison when you sit through your presentations on the Burj Khalifa, but this certainly drives the mixed design for the building. And the other thing, they wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing, because there's many parts of the building where the concrete is architectural. Well, this required a performance-based design of the concrete mix. And the fundamental base requirement for performance design of concrete mixtures is excellent communications. Excellent communications from between the owner, the designer, and the contractor. Everybody has to be at the table from the very beginning. They were able to achieve all of the requirements, and in fact, harking back to the sustainability requirement, the equivalency in environmental savings was equal to almost 30,000 barrels of oil, which at the beginning of this project would be very significant. This was before, this project was being conceived and designed far before the United States achieved their technology advancements that are allowing them to become more energy efficient. But look at the equivalency in gasoline as well in water. Really noteworthy. As I noticed that this will be the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere when it opens up, the top of the antenna spire reaches 1,776 feet, 1776. That's a very, very symbolic number because it represents the year the USA declared its independence. Many of you may have read the recent controversy over the height of this building. Some said the spire did not meet the architectural requirements necessary to be deemed a tall building. The jury met earlier this month, and it was approved. And in doing so, this becomes New York City's latest super tall building. Again, by 2020, it will be the only building in the Western Hemisphere on the list of top 20. The other project that I'd like to highlight to you, I'm going to put on my structural engineering cap now. I find this an amazingly inspiring project. This is in Macau, off of China, and this is the Grand Lisboa. Certainly a beautiful, beautiful building. The owners of this building wanted to create an expression, a visual feast, one that will be a delight to the people. They used the lotus leaf as symbolic value. First of all, it was the floral emblem of Macau, and second of all, for what it symbolizes. The symbolism in one world trade, of prosperity, and economic prosperity and independence is very important to community. And quite similarly in Macau, they were symbolizing the everlasting prosperity and success. This building certainly celebrates a significant accomplishment of turning the architect's vision into reality to create this shape. This was also added to the CNN's 25 most iconic skyscrapers this year. And reaching 258 meters, this is on the list of tall buildings. Here's the building without its facade, and as you can see, it is a predominantly concrete building. There are a few exceptions in the overhangs here, but I think I really enjoy this building because it shows what can be achieved, what can be realized using reinforced concrete design. They've used some very creative means of achieving the overhangs. I will show you a podium frame where they used sprayed fiber reinforced polymer concrete to create a shell. And the foundation, which I'll show you too, is quite innovative. The other thing, which was quite innovative and what we're seeing tremendous advancements in this decade, is the use of innovation in contracts. And that is true, not only in tall buildings, but in buildings, any kind of infrastructure of significance in most countries around the world. So the overhang, you can see the structure itself, composite columns and conventional reinforced concrete structure for the central part of the building, and then for the overhangs, they utilized a structural steel and truss system connected back to reinforced concrete wall beams for the overhung portion. This building was designed for a 200-year return period on wind. It also is designed for seismic requirements. Here is the podium shell, where they utilized the spray concrete, which you can see them applying here. So they leverage the best of materials in a very innovative way. This is my favorite part of the building, though. This is the foundation system. The building is built in a densely populated urban area, not much room for staging, not much room for excavation. So they utilize what we call top-down, bottom-up construction. So what does that mean? Well, typically you would excavate the entire site down to foundation level and start building. But what they did in this building, because of the confinements, is they excavated down to the depth of the mat foundation at the bottom of the shear walls. And they left the rest of the soil in place. And then they began their concrete construction up. Meanwhile, they drove down to the foundation level with steel piles and began to construct from grade level down, using the earth as their formwork, the structural slabs. So the ground was all in place, they would construct a slab, and then they would come and excavate out from underneath of it. and use the ground as their formwork for the next structural slab, and then excavate underneath until they came all the way down. And this allowed them to minimize the requirements for storage. It helped them with their dewatering techniques. This was in a high water table region. And you don't see this quite often, but when you do, it's a technique that I always admire. And then finally, the tender contract on this. It was not your traditional design, bid, build. It wasn't your traditional design, build. They used an innovative contract, a management contract that was put in place basically to facilitate communication and to accelerate the procurement process. Bear in mind, when you use innovation in contracting, and now I'm talking about the contract itself, it often changes the roles and responsibilities of the ready-mix producer, your concrete producer, your contractor, your concrete contractor, and your designer. So you always need to be mindful of that when you undertake a project with an innovative contract. I think you can see they certainly achieved the client's vision in this beautiful, beautiful structure. It should be no surprise that to build a tall building requires tremendous resources, and ACI is a good source for many. Of course, the two foundation resources for tall buildings is the 318 Building Code requirements for structural concrete, one of the world's leading standards for design and detailing, and Ron will elaborate a little bit more on 318, and ACI 301, what we call in the United States the Contractor's Bible. There are numerous papers that have been presented over the years, and many of these are available online to our members for free download. And then there's a multiplicity of documents on a variety of topics, creep and shrinkage being huge in tall buildings, but also fire resistance, formwork, foundations, joints, high-strength concrete, and now we have a new committee on ultra high-strength concrete. The last item, though, I want to highlight is the most important, and this is on quality assurance and quality control. In every concrete project, this is probably where the most important aspect, and this is where the one place we should never cut corners. The owner should have a good quality assurance program in place. Contractors should have an excellent quality control program in place. And there are a multiplicity of documents written on this topic and available through ACI. So what do we see in the future? Well, certainly the emerging markets are going to continue to be strong. They project that South and Southeast Asia, at least over the next 10 to 20 years, will be the center for tall building construction. And everybody is looking at three countries: Indonesia, Vietnam, and India. Why? Over 25% of the world's population live in these in this region. And right now there's only 4 tall buildings that are recognized in the tall building database in the entirety of Indonesia, Vietnam, and India. But if you look at India's aspirations and the tremendous advancements that you've made in this century, and the vision going forward to build between now and 2030, 2040, the equivalent of a Chicago, Illinois, in India every single year, the infrastructure, the buildings, as you urbanize more fully in this country, we recognize that this will certainly become a mecca for tall buildings. An example, my company is working on Delhi 1 in Noida, which fits the bill, right? Mixed-use development. This will be 9 high-rise towers. The function, again, is mixed-use, residential, office, retail. Total built-up area, 5.5 million square feet, and buildings ranging in height anywhere from 180 to 290 meters. This is currently under construction, hoping to complete in 2015. So, conclusions of today: development in tall buildings will continue. With Southeast and South Asia ascending, all eyes are on India, and tall buildings will continue to be the forum for innovation and research and practice. We see this ACI chapter in India as a very important focal point for the future as new technology and new innovations emerge with your tall building and your stellar infrastructure that goes with it. And we're proud to partner with you. For those of you, I need to give kudos to my company who underwrites my travel and my activities at ACI quite generously. For those of you who are not familiar with AECOM, we are 45,000 employees worldwide. We're located in 140 countries. We have annual revenues of $8.2 billion, and we're quite proud to be on the list of one of the world's most ethical companies, and we're also quite proud of the affiliation of India's most ethical man. Deepak Parekh of HDFC is one of our strategic advisors and members of our one of the 5 members of our global advisory board. And of course, the American Concrete Institute, which all of you are familiar with and aligns quite beautifully with AECOM, with our 20,000 members in 129 countries. And I think each and every one of us are proud to be affiliated with this organization that produces model codes and specification guides and reports on the best use of concrete. Thank you.